The drought did not arrive all at once. It crept in quietly, like a thief who studies a house for weeks before breaking in. First, the clouds stopped coming. Then the mornings lost their chill. The creek that ran through Eli Carter's ranch thinned into a slow, apologetic trickle, and finally into a line of cracked mud that looked like a scar across the land. By the time Eli admitted to himself that he was in trouble, trouble had already taken everything. Eli had been born on that ranch, raised by a father who believed a man could measure his worth by the strength of his handshake and the health of his cattle. His mother had planted the cottonwood trees near the fence line, saying they would give shade to future generations. For decades, the land had provided just enough, never luxury, never ease, but dignity. Eli had inherited not just acres and fences, but a promise to keep going no matter how hard it got. This time, though, the land did not answer his efforts. He sold equipment first, then half his herd. He woke before sunrise every day, walking the fields with a knot in his chest, counting losses like a man counting breaths. When the bank notices came, he folded them carefully and put them in a drawer, as if neatness could slow the inevitable. At night, he lay awake listening to the dry wind scrape against the house, wondering how a place that had once felt alive could now feel like it was dying. Neighbors stopped coming by, not out of cruelty, but because everyone was hurting. There were only so many sympathetic nods and borrowed buckets of water to go around. Eli learned the quiet language of desperation, how men avoided each other's eyes at the feed store, how conversations ended too quickly when money was mentioned. Pride kept him from asking for help, even when the last of his cattle were gone and the barn stood empty. The day he lost the ranch did not come with drama. No shouting, no collapse to his knees. A man from the bank drove out in a clean truck that looked wrong against the dust and heat. Papers were signed on the hood. Eli handed over the keys to a house that had never really felt like it could be taken from him. When the truck disappeared down the road, he stood alone in the yard, feeling lighter and heavier at the same time, like something essential had been cut away. He packed what he could into the back of his old pickup: tools, clothes, a framed photograph of his parents standing in front of the house on a greener day. He did not know where he was going, only that he could not stay. The ranch without cattle, without water, without ownership, felt like a grave. He was driving out when he saw her. She stood by the fence of the neighboring property, one hand resting on the weathered wood, watching him with an expression that was neither pity nor triumph. Her name was Clara Whitmore. She was the widow everyone knew about, but few truly knew. Her husband had died years earlier, leaving her a modest spread of land that somehow, stubbornly, had survived the drought better than most. People whispered explanations: underground springs, smarter management, luck, but no one really knew. Eli had spoken to her only a handful of times over the years. Polite greetings, brief exchanges about the weather, back when weather was still something people could complain about casually. Now, seeing her there as he was leaving, he felt exposed, like she could see the failure written across his face. She raised a hand, signaling him to stop. He hesitated, then pulled over, dust swirling around the tires. He rolled down the window, unsure what to say. "I heard," she said simply. There was no need to ask what she meant. "I'm sorry," he replied, the words tasting thin. They stood in silence for a moment, the kind that feels heavier than conversation. Finally, Clara spoke again. "You don't have anywhere to go, do you?" Eli swallowed. He considered lying, but something in her steady gaze stopped him. "No," he admitted. She nodded once, as if confirming something she had already decided. "I can help," she said. "But there's a condition." He stiffened. Pride flared, wounded but not dead. "I'm not looking for charity." "Neither am I," she replied calmly. "That's why there's a condition." She told him to come inside, to sit down, to hear her out. Against his better judgment, he followed her through the gate, parking his truck near a house that was smaller than his had been, but solid. Inside, the air was cooler. The walls held the quiet strength of a place that had known loss, but not surrendered to it. Clara poured 2 glasses of water, a small act that felt extravagant in a world where water had become precious. She slid one toward him. "I don't want to own you," she said. "I don't want a hired hand who feels like he owes me his life. I want a partner." Eli frowned. "In what?" "In everything," she said. "The land, the work, the risk, the reward. We share it all." He stared at her, certain he had misunderstood. "You barely know me." I know enough, she said. I know you didn't walk away when things got hard. I know you sold everything before you asked anyone for help. I know you care about the land. He laughed bitterly. Caring didn't save it. No, she agreed. But it matters anyway. She explained her idea slowly, carefully. Her land was holding on, but barely. She could not manage it alone forever. She needed someone who understood ranching not just as a business, but as a way of living. In return, she was willing to offer him half of everything: ownership, decisions, profits, losses. Not as a favor, but as an agreement. Eli felt the weight of the offer pressing on him. Half of everything also meant half of the risk. If it failed, he would fail again, and there would be no pride left to hide behind. Why? He asked quietly. Why me? Clara looked out the window toward the fields. Because I've been alone a long time, she said. And because I believe some things survive only if they're shared. He thought of his father's words about handshakes and worth. He thought of the empty barn, the silent house he had left behind. Finally, he nodded. All right, he said. We share it all. The work began the next morning. There was no ceremony, no announcement to the world. Just two people standing side by side in a field that still had more dust than grass, making plans. They argued at first, not angrily, but intensely. Eli wanted to rebuild fast, to restock cattle as soon as possible. Clara insisted on patience, on conserving resources, on planting drought-resistant crops before expanding livestock. Slowly, they learned each other's rhythms. Eli rose early, full of restless energy. Clara moved with deliberate calm, measuring each step. Where he pushed, she steadied. Where she hesitated, he encouraged. The land seemed to respond, not miraculously, but subtly. A patch of grass held on longer than expected. A well that had nearly failed steadied. The community noticed. People began to talk, not unkindly this time, but with curiosity. Some doubted the arrangement would last. Others quietly hoped it would, because everyone needed a story that ended differently. Eli moved into the small spare room of Clara's house. They kept their distance at first, bound by agreement rather than affection. Evenings were spent at the table, going over numbers, planning, sometimes sitting in companionable silence. Loss had shaped them both, and neither rushed to fill the space it had left. One night, months into the partnership, a storm came. Not a gentle rain, but a hard, pounding downpour that rattled the windows and turned dust into mud. Eli stood on the porch, watching water soak into the ground, feeling something loosen in his chest that he had not realized was still tight. Clara joined him, handing him a cup of coffee. They stood together, shoulder to shoulder, not speaking. In that moment, the condition, "we share it all," felt less like a contract and more like a truth. The drought did not end overnight. There were setbacks. A portion of fence collapsed. A small herd they invested in had to be sold again when feed ran short. There were arguments that ended with slammed doors and long walks taken alone. But there were also victories. Crops that survived. Calves born healthy. Accounts that slowly, cautiously, moved out of the red. Eli found himself laughing again, sometimes at the smallest things. Clara's dry humor. The way the dogs chased each other through the fields. The simple satisfaction of a day's work done honestly. He realized that while he had lost everything once, he had not lost himself. One evening, as they sat watching the sun sink low and red over the land, Eli spoke the thought that had been growing in him. I was wrong, he said. Clara looked at him. About what? About caring not being enough, he said. It didn't save my ranch, but it saved me. She smiled softly. Sometimes that's the part we miss. Years later, people would tell the story differently. They would say the widow saved the rancher, or that the rancher brought new life to the widow's land. The truth was quieter and stronger than either version. Two people, shaped by loss, chose to share what they had left. They shared the work, the fear, the hope. And in doing so, they built something that could survive even when the rain did not come. The land was never what it had been in the old days. It did not need to be. It was enough. And so were they.